Today we are going to have the 16th seminar from Emar, Foundation for Labor Research. Our visitor today is esteemed journalist friend of ours, Kumru from Turkey, and she's going to tell us about the latest developments in the legal structure and all the other events whom not everybody might have followed. And she's going to give us a picture of what's happening in Turkey, a sort of long view. Thank you. Please.
Thanks. When last time I saw you, when you suggested the topic, Kumru, can you tell us what's happened since the 15th of July attempt of military coup in Turkey? I was really kind of terrified, saying, oh, this is such a big subject, how can I tell about it in detail? Working on it, I had this difficulty again, you know, what to tell and how to contain it into a kind of seminar size dimension. So this is going to be a kind of filtered picture of what's happened. And I just focused on certain things that I thought were critical, important, and excluded, unfortunately, certain things that, of course, have some importance, but probably should be talked about on separate seminars, like economy, foreign policy, and so on. It's mainly human rights and legal framework that I'm going to talk about today. The coup attempt of the 15th of July 2016 presented a godsend opportunity for President Erdogan's AKP government to further speed up their plan to establish a regime that is extremely authoritarian. I think I will go back a bit in my narrative, because to be able to understand what happened what happened during the year 2016 and afterwards, we have to look a little bit to what happened during the AKP's 3 terms of government before that. The coup attempt came on the 14th year of AKP's government, and during these 14 years, as you can see, AKP had lots of election victories. When I looked at it, I could divide these 14 years into 3 periods. The first period I'm going to talk about is between 2002 and 2007. The first period in power, the first 5 years, that is when AKP's message was reformist, liberal, democratic, pro-European, pro-human rights, pro-internationalist. They were according to themselves, they were the democratic, conservative, populist tradition of the country, as opposed to authoritarian, militarist, anti-democratic, Kemalist, secular state establishment. They were the underdogs and thus far discriminated against by the Kemalist elites, they said, and they were going to reform the political system, and they were going to bring about freedoms and a better harmony within the society. This image and this narrative AKP kind of reflected in the first term won them quite a number of supporters, apart from their religious conservative right-wing waters, they also got quite a support among the left-wing, liberal, pro-European secular circles, among Kurds who longed for more autonomy and participation within the system. So Kurds usually go for parties or support the ideas that have the possibility of change throughout the Republican history. It also attracted some religious groups, tariqas, sects, and most notably among them Gulen movement, which is a kind of semi-religious kind of, or religious, but kind of focused on power sort of organization. Internationally, AKP also allied itself strongly with the US, which was looking for a nice, democratic and easily controlled Islamic model for the Middle East at the time. It also convinced the EU that at last Turkey was going to be serious in reforming its political and economic structures. This was quite a strong position for AKP, and they were something totally different from what we see today. In the second term, like 2007, 2011, AKP started getting overconfident. Its partnership with Gulen movement was more visible, and Gulen movement, with the help of AKP leaders, established itself in the state structures very firmly, in bureaucracy, in schools, in army, in everywhere. Together, AKP and its unelected partner, Gulen movement, they attacked the most dangerous opponent they think they had, the Kemalist secular establishment, and especially their dominance in the army. And that also was a kind of two-edged thing. The army had the tradition of course, meddling in politics quite often in Turkey thus far, and that was when they kind of challenged the army or the seculars within the army and the army's power within politics. It was applauded by a lot of liberals and seculars as well. In this period, in their second term, which you can see orange here, brownish, they did not deliver most of their promises on the progress to be a member of EU and so on. But they started also becoming quite undemocratic and harsh towards their opponents. But they still kept most of their alliances and support intact with the help of their new narrative. They were, they say, ending the dominance of the untouchable impact of military in political life. They were doing that, so everything else was mere detail, and people had to endure a bit of undemocratic pressure. So the third term, starting with the 2011 general election, AKP is even more confident now, locked its eyes on the radical regime change, and this, in this path, it started shedding its critical alliances or support. In terms of human rights, it was openly violating the rule of law, and it was the corruption was quite out in the open now. And just before the elections in 2015, you could tell, or any analyst in Turkey, any self-respecting analyst could tell you that AKP was not going to lose any elections anymore. They couldn't afford it. When democratic processes are blocked, when politics cannot be done through normal channels, it is a perfect climate either for a revolution or for a coup d'etat. So when it came to 2016, many people in Turkey were who also experienced previous coups like myself and many of you. People could smell the coming of a coup d'etat, I think. In this third term of AKP government, before the attempt of a military coup, we have some trends. I want to talk about three trends. One of the defining themes of this period is the collapse of the peace process, started around 2009 with some secret negotiations and made official in 2013. Its collapse is one of the main trends. When you look back, it becomes quite clear that this photograph is dated 2013. I took it in Diyarbakir, the capital town of the Kurdish population in Turkey. This is the New Year celebration, Nevruz New Year celebrations in Diyarbakir. And this is the stage, and there are guerrilla fighters, PKK guerrilla fighters, on the stage, because on this Nevruz day, PKK's jailed leader, Abdullah Öcalan, sent a letter of declaring peace with the state. And that was read to probably 1 million people who gathered around that stage. And there were PKK fighters even at some stage came on the stage and showed themselves. So that was a very powerful and emotional point in history, in Turkish history. But you can say, when you look back, when you look at how things progressed afterwards, you can see that the AKP government saw the peace process, in fact, as a way of controlling the Kurdish population in order to make an authoritarian one-man regime even more possible, rather than believing in a peaceful solution. When the Kurdish political movement was not, it showed that it was not dancing to that tune, Erdogan was furious and he ended the peace process. How am I going to tell that? How I am saying this is very clear when you look at the sequence of the events. Like this is 2013 Nevruz, when the peace letter has been read to millions, and then the government was also agreeing that there was a peace process, and it was for the first time out in the open and defended by the government. And then a year later, there was presidential elections for the first time, because the legislation was changed and the president was chosen by the public vote for the first time. And Erdogan was going to be the main candidate, of course. But then the Kurds decided to run as well. Selahattin Demirtas, the leader of the Kurdish-led Left Alliance, I will call HDP party, decided to run for presidential elections, 2014, and now we learn that the government actually sent a message to Demirtas, threatening him and saying that, why are you running for the presidency? There is a peace process. They wanted the Kurds not to run, and they were very angry when they decided to run, and because it was making their, because they thought if the Kurds didn't run, the votes against the Social Democratic candidate on the side of Erdogan was going to be bigger. Kurds, at the same year, 2014, Kurds in Syria declared autonomous cantons, autonomous areas, 3 of them in northern Syria, in an area called Rojava. They declared 3 autonomous regions. In 2012, the Syrian forces, Syrian army, withdrew from the Kurdish areas in northern Syria. And now, 2 years later, the Kurds were declaring autonomy. So that was changing quite a lot on the table. You know, the government, Erdogan, felt that the Kurds were getting too strong, too powerful, and having too many bargaining chips. And then, 2015, Kurdish-led left alliance, HDP again, they decided to run for the elections as a party rather than independent candidates, because there is a, that's technically quite a kind of complicated issue, but there's an election threshold, there's a national threshold on the elections. If you don't get 10% of the vote, you don't get into the parliament. So the party before used to go into the elections with independent candidates. Everybody knew who they were, and they voted for the independent candidates because they weren't sure about that they would pass the threshold. So this time they decided that they could go over the threshold, they would pass the threshold, and they went into the elections as a party, which of course, if you know the election system, increases their possibility of having doubling the number of their MPs. Because if you have independence, you kind of, the votes that you get more than needed are just wasted. But as a party, it's not. So the Erdogan also was very furious about this, because the HDP ran the elections with a very left-wing manifesto, with a very peaceful manifesto as well, and it was, and also it kind of challenged the Erdogan's idea of a very strong presidency, a regime change. They said that you will never be the strong president of this country. So that Erdogan was furious, really furious. And after that point, there was not much really on the way of collapse for the peace process. On the 7th of June 2015, there was the general elections. The Kurdish party passed the threshold by far, with some 14% of the vote, and got 80 MPs in the 600 parliament. That was the third party in the parliament. Erdogan hated the results because his party couldn't get the necessary majority to be able to do the constitutional changes for a regime change, a strong presidency and so on. So he just decided to not kind of accept the election results. And he kind of declared that, after a while he declared that without trying to form the government with different parties, he decided that a second election is needed. and 5 months afterwards a second election was done. In between there were lots of bombs and attacks happening in Turkey, claimed to be done by ISIS, but it is dubious. Many people do not believe that, or many people believe that the government actually did know about, at least know about these bomb attacks. Some hundreds of people died in 5 months. It was a very huge scare campaign, really, to take people out of the streets and to actually blackmail the population, saying that if I am not going to get what I want, this is what you're going to have, sort of thing. And it had its effect. And also he and the AKP party blamed the HDP, the Kurdish-led party, for everything, and for PKK's actions as well, and what is happening elsewhere in Syria and so on. So it was a kind of whole package, and 5 months later Erdogan got a better majority. HDP still got into the parliament, still passed the threshold, but this time got 60 MPs. So that was what happened just in the term before the military coup attempt in Turkey. The peace process collapsed, and Erdogan actually showed that he was not going to bring peace on that.
No.
Now, that was one alliance or support. I mean, Kurds were kind of hoping peace, and they kind of lost that hope after 2015, definitely. And also some other sectors of society, mainly liberals and Democrats who believed in reform, and that such a thing as conservative liberalism could exist. They also were very much disillusioned. And this is a photograph taken during the Gezi protests. Gezi, during the Gezi protests during 2013. Most of you know, but Gezi protests started when they started taking out, demolishing a park within the center park of Istanbul, in Taksim Square, Gezi. People, kind of some 50, 100 people gathered around, and when the police reaction was very brutal over a couple of days, the protests were getting bigger and bigger, and it became sort of Tahrir of Turkey, or the Occupy movement of Turkey, sort of thing. It became a democratic protest of that brought about lots of people for different reasons. This picture shows two young people who are running away from the police brutality, gas and water and whatsoever. One of them carries a flag. You can't see it very good actually, but this flag, the yellow flag, is the flag of the Kurdish party at the time, BDP, and the party before HDP. And the second person has a Turkish flag with a symbol of Atatürk, the founder of Republic, on it. So that flag is carried by kind of secular nationalist sort of people as well. So these two brought together by that protest is a very much kind of a symbol of Gezi movement that brought together lots of different sectors of society, like from anti-capitalist Muslims to businessmen, to unions, to feminists, to gay movement, LGBT movement, and to social democrats, to communists. Everybody came together there. Millions of people took to streets in many different towns and cities of Turkey. During almost 4 months, they stayed on the streets. And it created a very strong front against AKP, and that was the biggest challenge AKP has seen thus far. And they were really quite scared with it. And the most important thing I think about this protest was that it kind of took one very important weapon or tool from the hands of Erdogan to divide and rule, basically. It brought together so many people in struggle towards democratic change, and that was not forgotten by the people after that, although the protests were suppressed. And also, that was the end of, that was, if there were still people who believed that Erdogan would kind of bring positive change, democratization or anything like that, they kind of probably were disillusioned by then. The third important trend during this period was the break of the partnership between Gulen movement and the AKP government. There were indications, I think from 2011, that the alliance was not working well for both parts. And they were kind of starting, they were, each one of the allies wanted power exclusively for itself, basically. That was what it was. Gulen movement was wanting to ask for much more than AKP was prepared to give. And there were lots of issues for contention. One was the Kurdish peace process as well. Gulen movement was very much against the peace process in the beginning, so that was one of the contention points, I think. In 2013, the AKP decided to close down hundreds of special schools run by Gülenists. That was a big thing for them, because that's their money machine. They get their quite a lot of money from those schools and employ lots of people and impact on thousands, tens of thousands of students as well. So to lose these schools was a very big thing. They responded by leaking the dirty files they kind of gathered about AKP in 2014. at the end of 2013. It was all out in the open, all that corruption, nepotism, and control freakery, with telephone taps, documents, thousands of them. Everybody listened to them through social media, and it was crazy. And in the end, nothing came out because Erdogan managed to suppress it by kind of arresting the prosecutors and police chiefs that kind of run the operation, and cleansed hundreds of public servants and suppressed that Gulenist attack. And they kind of called it a kind of coup attempt as well. So this was the kind of period before we saw the coup attempt in 2016. So you could tell that something was coming, and it came. Coup attempt on the 15th of July 2016 was followed 5 days afterwards with an emergency law, declaration of emergency law, and the government started ruling by decrees, government decrees. There's massive violations of human rights. Thousands of people were arrested, tortured, beaten, lynched. We will see the violations in detail later. The constitutional referendum was organized in the following year, 2017, April, under emergency law. And since the beginning of this year almost, or since January, we have a war going on towards the Kurds in Syria that also serves as an ultra-emergency rule within the country, because everything is banned and everything is a crime. So it was indeed a godsend opportunity for Erdogan, because we could see that it was coming. The one-man rule, the authoritarian regime was coming. It was going to come, but maybe it was going to take more time. But with the coup attempt in 2016, AKP found the opportunity to kind of run the country as it wishes, and it still does it, and it does everything it wants at the moment, really. Emergency law, after the declaration of emergency law, about 30 government decrees passed. These decrees are kind of regulating legislation. I mean, they are 1,200 changes in 400 laws, for example. And there is a very respectable research done, supported by Heinrich Böll Foundation in Germany and done by Turkish academics. They found out that 90% of these changes in laws by these decrees were unrelated with anything with emergency situation in Turkey. In that sense, Parliament has been totally bypassed. We can easily say that. Judiciary has been bypassed also, because these decrees are not subject to judiciary checks. You cannot appeal against them. And these decrees also made it possible to make a purge of epic proportions, really, within public sector workers. We will come to that. Tens of thousands of people were put out of jobs. 3,000 companies, non-profit organizations, universities, television channels, student halls, schools, unions, associations, voluntary sector organizations closed down, and their assets were confiscated. When we focus on the big purge, people call it a slow death, because you really take everything from these people. 110,000 public workers within some months, really, within the first 3-4 months of after the coup attempt, were declared kind of sacked by government decrees. In addition, 4,500 prosecutors, judges were put out of job. But within this 110,000, 25,000 police, 10,000 soldiers, 8,000 doctors, hundreds of imams included. These people are not only put out of their, expelled from their jobs, they lost all their rights and pensions, however long they worked for public sector, whatever they did. They don't have any rights for a pension or anything. In addition, when we mentioned 3,000 other organizations in private sector and voluntary sector closed down, as a result of that, it is estimated that 50,000 additional jobs lost in private sector. These people, the public servants and the private sector workers, they also lost any prospects for a new job as well, because there is now a new rule that you have to get a security vetting to get a public sector job, and if you don't get that security vetting, you can't be employed by the private sector as well. And if you lose your job as a result of a government decree, there is a kind of a kind of secret thing is going on. You go and apply for a private sector job, and they kind of tell you that you are not employable.
Blacklisting.
Blacklisting, yeah, that's true. Yeah. So it is a slow death. This is why it is a slow death. Who are targeted? The people who are targeted are the ones that are thought to be Gulenists, members of this Gulen movement, or the people who are believed to be related to them, the people who are members of the unions who are not supportive to the government, especially the leftist ones, Kurds who are related to any kind of Kurdish political movement or organizations, and any other people who are thought to be suspicious by any member of the public, because there is a huge mechanism to encourage people to inform on others. So people inform on others, and you could be targeted for before knowing what kind of came from where. And there is no real appeal mechanism, actually. They say they established a commission, emergency law commission, and this commission, there are 105,000 people appealed to this commission by the end of the year 2017. to get their jobs back. So far, only 3,000 of the cases were looked at, and only 40 people were given positive response. So this means that there is no appeal mechanism really, because it happens anyway. I mean, these people are jobless, without money, and without any credibility anywhere in the eyes of any employer for 2 years now, and I mean, and they can't appeal really. So there are lots. The only reason why they actually established this commission is to prevent people going to European Court of Human Rights, because they say, oh, there is a way to appeal in Turkey. So before they appeal in the Turkish Commission, they can't, and get the result, they can't go to the European Court of Human Rights. So it's not surprising that in the first 9 months there were reported 37 reported suicides among the people who were victimized within this purge and put in prison and so on and so forth. This could be a very kind of conservative number, and now it could be much more. These days, people, quite a number of people, I've never heard anything like this in my life. Quite a lot of people are trying to burn themselves and trying to do incredible things these days. So this is a kind of quite crazy situation where people are put in very desperate situation. So education, so I'm going to look at some sectors which took the biggest blow. Education was one of them. The people, the 110,000 people we talked about, 40,000 of them were teachers. 5,000 of them were academics in public universities. We have our friend Zafer here tonight, who is from Turkish academia, who can tell us later, I hope, what is happening really in much more detail. This is only in public sector. In private sector, 1,043 private schools and student halls closed down, mostly with the suspicion of being closed to Gulen movement. 15 private universities were closed, and it is thought that additional 23,000 jobs, mostly teachers, are lost through these closures. In addition, teachers who are put out, expelled from their jobs, 22,500 lost their teaching licenses as well. They are cancelled. 1,200 academics are among, most of them are among the people who lost their jobs. They signed a peace petition. They are called peace academics in Turkey these days. They called the government to get back to the peace process with the Kurds, and they are persecuted for it nowadays. They are in courts these days, and the first, actually today, was the first verdict in one of these cases, and two academics were given 1 year and 3 months imprisonment, accused of terrorist propaganda, I suppose. Thousands of students also lost their schools and lost their bursaries, including the ones in foreign countries, some of them. One very critical area is of course judiciary. I mean, if you don't have justice, or if you have a public who don't believe in justice, you can't just, you can't just talk about a society or any kind of democratic system anywhere. First and foremost, there is no, judges are not safe. Judges are under threat. 5,000 judges and prosecutors were sacked. That means 1 in 5 judges and prosecutors are out of their jobs now. These include 2 high court judges as well. Hundreds of judges among them also arrested, and some of them were taken from their courtrooms by the police. In addition, hundreds of court clerks and other court workers sacked, arrested, imprisoned. So the judges these days are kind of really passing all sorts of decisions with the fear of themselves being sacked or persecuted, even if they are not supportive of the government. If there is no safety for judges, we can't expect any justice from courts or judges. So, imprisonment. This is actually a very fascinating graphic. This is from the source of this graphic is the Ministry of Justice, and as you can see, the number of people in prison from 1970s to 2007 is under 80,000, and from 2007 you can see that it gradually goes up, and in 2015 there is 180,000 people in prisons in 2015, before the military coup attempt, and 1 year later, after the coup attempt, we have it to close to 230,000. So an additional 50,000 people are in jail, I suppose. But one more interesting indication in here is the proportions or differences between light blues and dark blues. Dark blues are the people in prison with a conviction, and the light ones are the people in prison without a conviction. That means that they are either not indicted or they are still on trial. So that is a huge gap for the first time in 50 years. That is kind of, the difference is 90,000 people are in prisons, still not convicted. Some of them, I can't give you a number now, but quite a lot of them, a serious number of them, are not even indicted. Their cases have not started yet. So, officials say that prisons today are 22,000 over their capacity, so it's overcrowded, obviously. But hey, they are promising 45 new prisons to be ready this year, in 2018. And no need to say that prison conditions are awful. Apart from the overcrowded prison cells and all that, there are restrictions like banning letters, banning visitation, solitary confinement, banning books, etc. That amount to extrajudiciary punishment. Actually, you know, it is those people are subjected to these punishments without even being convicted, most of them. And also, even if they are convicted, the conviction doesn't kind of include these things. Also, these punishments will include soon, because it's legislated, that uniforms are going to be used by the prisoners, they say. Political prisoners will wear orange, no, what was that? The strange brown, I think. They're going to wear strange brown uniforms.
Almond color.
Almond color, sorry, yeah. So, and it's not only prisons, the country is an open prison, we can easily say that. Because as a kind of way of putting people out of streets, discouraging them from expressing opposition, they are doing lots of different things. Like these are all extrajudicial things as well. Like you don't have to, you know, these are punishments and intimidation, long detentions. Everybody is taken under detention if they attend any protest really these days. 90% of any protests are ending in detention. People are beaten up mostly, and from some detention centers and prisons we are also getting reports of torture in old methods like electricity and so on. Thousands, tens of thousands are taken to courts or prosecutors or courts, and before they're indicted with anything, they are given a travel ban. That means tens of thousands of people cannot travel. Their passports are taken, cancelled. Even people who are in other countries having a bursary, having an exchange program, having a kind of program in a school or something, there are lots of people like that whose passports are cancelled and they are paperless now. There's also this thing called conditional release with regular police control. That is a terrible thing. You are released, but you have to go and sign regularly with the local police, so you can't travel. And there is house arrests. We have a small number of people given house arrests as well. And thousands of people are taken to courts. That is also another way of punishing and intimidating people. On the other hand, people who are pro-government but resort to violence against other people with the pretext of protecting the government and the state, they are immune. There was immediately a law with the declaration of emergency law immediately after the coup attempt that said that the security forces were immune of any blame or accusation of the actions they kind of performed during the coup attempt and during the emergency law period. And then later, or kind of, I think it was the end of 2017, this immunity extended to civilians who helped security forces. That was also declared by decree. That is a very dangerous thing to do because there are lots of groups of people who are now organized pro-government groups, and there are rumors of some military camps training these people. Also, I mean, here, for example, this picture is taken during the night of the coup attempt, or after, evening. These people are lynching the soldiers who surrendered, who were under orders from their commanders during that night, and they surrendered to the public. They gave up their weapons, and still they are lynched, beaten up, and some of them were killed. Beheaded, one of them, yeah. So it was a horrible thing, and these people will not be responsible, or they will not be tried for this. So this picture is anyone from Ankara, I don't know, among you. This is Yüksel Street in Ankara. It's a bit like, it used to be something like Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park. That was where the protests happened. People kind of said what they wanted to say. Here, it is a human rights monument there. At the moment barricaded by the police, under detention. So it's a really, you don't need metaphors in Turkey. Things are metaphorical. It's just really strange. So you can't protest. Strikes, industrial action by the unions are usually delayed with the pretext of national security and so on by the government. At the moment there are a number of strikes that are delayed by the government, like the metal workers included. Social media is actually one of the last things that you can see different opinions, like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and so on. And this is also very strictly controlled, especially, for example, after the war started against the Kurdish forces in Syria last month. After that, there is a terror going on, like, anybody who criticizes mildly the Turkish army's attack to Syria is detained almost. Over 1,000 people are taken to the police. They were detained and took to the courts. Some of them were arrested, some of them are given the police control, the conditional release thing. This is a very influential way of intimidating people. It is very visible that people are now kind of not writing what they think as freely as they would. The informants are a new feature of our lives. There are a friend of mine who is out of prison recently. I visited her in Ankara, and she was saying that there is this huge complex in Ankara where you have the courts and the prison at the same time, Sincan. There were queues of people who were queuing up with files under their arms to inform on people, is so popular to inform these days. And there's even a telephone line, 140. You can dial 140, and it is called terror informing line, terrorist informing line. So you can inform anybody phoning this number and say that this person is a terrorist, and then you are in trouble. And in the Kurdish parts of Turkey, there are curfews in hundreds of rural regions, and people do not talk about that. I mentioned the paramilitary groups, pro-government paramilitary groups training and kind of threatening people and so on. Another problem in terms of the democratic rights and the kind of intimidation of people is the use of mosques, really. The government and the coup attempt is a turning point for the government's use of the mosques as a propaganda center. During that night, the night of the coup attempt, from a certain point, the government sent sent a kind of directive to the imams of the mosques, and they started prayers, singing prayers, and calling people to the street to resist to the coup. And at that moment, I mean, people took to the streets, some people, and the people who took the streets, following that call, were kind of, their slogans were religious as well. They were saying Allahu Akbar, you know, that sort of thing. So it wasn't a kind of, it wasn't possible for a kind of secular democratic person to join to that sort of thing. It was quite intimidating because in Turkey, in the past, in our history, we have a tradition, we have a kind of experience that religious groups were used and manipulated to attack certain sectors of, certain oppositional sectors of the society, and that was used as a kind of weapon by the government. So, but for the first time, the mosques officially were in it. You know, they were really calling people to streets. So after the coup, this was official. Now they are sending quite political, political content on Friday, to be read on Friday prayers and so on. The last one I heard about was not today, but last Friday. The imams were calling people to jihad against Kurdish forces in Afrin, in Syria. So that is quite scary, that is quite manipulative, and something to be aware of for the future. Something that we should be aware of is, of course, the media scene. Media scene was already very distorted before the military coup attempt. As we saw in different terms of, especially on the third term of AKP, it became much more authoritarian, and it's completed almost totally the control of the media. A recent research shows that 7 out of the 10 best-selling newspapers are owned directly by government people. 7 out of 10. That is so serious. And the remaining 3, which are Sözcü, Hürriyet, and probably Habertürk, are not directly ruled by government people, but they are hostages because their bosses are businessmen, and they have to take contracts from the government, or they are afraid of government sending tax inspectors suddenly or something. They are totally very scared and controlled indirectly, although. Televisions, you have the same. But you can say that on televisions, you don't have any, you have some small oppositional papers maybe, or kind of independent papers, but no independent televisions on satellite or cable, some on internet. And very small effect they have. All this situation became much worse under the emergency law, of course, and lately with the war situation it became even worse. This is a graphic by the Reporters Sans Frontières, the Reporters Without Borders in Turkey. That is a quarterly indication of how many journalists are in jail in Turkey. Turkey is the biggest jailer of journalists in Turkey, in the world, and it is even including China and Russia and, you know, all these countries which
Egypt,
have huge...
Egypt.
Egypt, yeah. With huge, much bigger populations, of course, as well. This is 122, but this is the end of 2017, so it is 130 now again, according to this graphic. But this doesn't include the, this is only journalists, according to RSF. This doesn't include other media workers, I think, which should be included, and when you count them as well, this number becomes like 160. It's more realistic. And you can notice that before the military coup attempt it was 32, and now it is 130. So that shows you how it is. And it is not journalists, it is journalism which is targeted, somebody said. That is true. Apart from the journalists in the jail, every week 5 or 10 journalists are detained nowadays, especially with the war situation. It became much worse. 200 media organizations closed down, their assets were confiscated. 3,000 media workers lost their jobs. Hundreds of them lost their passports. Hundreds of press cards cancelled, because press cards in Turkey are given by the government, surprisingly. They are not given by the unions, as we have it here. Access to 150,000 internet sites are blocked, including Wikipedia. The only country in the world, they say, who bans Wikipedia. And a new legislation tells us that all the internet sites using videos will have to get licenses and checked by Turkish government appointed, mostly, committee, Rütük. 550 journalists are tried, and this number is the ones only tried for doing their jobs, doing news, sort of thing, writing and news making. They are accused of doing terrorist propaganda, most of them, being members of terrorist organizations, having known about the coup attempt and supporting it, or being spies. That is of most that can happen to you. You know, one of them was released, maybe you heard, a German national as well, dual nationality he had, Deniz Yücel. He was accused of being a spy by the President, Erdogan, named by him, and he said he will never be released as long as I sit here on this chair, and then he was released the other day as a result of negotiations with Germany. These three people, Ahmet Altan, Mehmet Altan, and Nazlı Ilıcak, three quite prominent journalists. The lady is a kind of right-wing one who supported AKP and was a member of the parliament in a kind of Islamic party before. The other two are liberals, well-known liberals, who supported the AKP in its first two terms. They actually are sentenced to life imprisonment last week. And earlier, before that decision, sentencing, the Constitutional Court actually decided on their case, and they said the imprisonment of the three were unconstitutional and unlawful, but the local court refused to listen to the Constitutional Court. That is actually, if we have to have one example that Turkey is not has not have the rule of law, that is the utmost example of it. Constitutional Court is not listened to. I'm going a bit fast here, time limitations. The political parties, AKP is alliancing itself with MHP, which is a nationalist party. Both of them are hoping to benefit from this alliance more than the other. The Nationalist Party is hoping to bypass the threshold rule, which is still there because of the Kurdish-led party. You know, it has to have there. It has to be there. And then a new nationalist party emerges, probably will get into parliament. CHP, the main Social Democrat, the center-left party, is constantly shooting itself on the foot, not doing much. HDP, which is the Kurdish-led left-wing alliance, cannot move at the moment at all. It's very much under pressure. Out of 59 MPs it has, 7 stripped of their title, 11 MPs of that party are in prison, 100 of their mayors in prison. Their local governments they had, over 100, are taken from them, confiscated, and put some government kind of sent some other kind of bureaucrat to rule the local government. 300 party cadres and probably an additional 5,000 members of the party are at the moment in prison. Constitutional referendum last year, spring, is done under emergency law. No democratic public debate was done. It wasn't possible. No democratic consensus was reached in the parliament. Huge irregularities reported during the voting. Huge. And then still the result was very close, despite all that. The No Front still today believe that the referendum was stolen from them. The result was actually no, but it was actually rigged. In the constitution, very quickly, we can say that the hierarchy replaces checks and balances, which is the main characteristic of a democratic system of any kind. I'm not a constitutional expert at all, but they say that there are systems that are based mostly on mutual independence of the different powers in the system, like the government, the executive power, the legislative power, and the judiciary powers are either mutually independent or mutually interdependent. Or sometimes it's a mixture, but the main thing is that these have to be mutual, so that the different powers could check each other and balance each other. This system that is accepted with the new constitution, with a dubious referendum, is not doing that. It's a constitution fit for a man. The president has all the executive powers. In the olden days we had the government and the prime minister as the kind of head of the executive. Now it's the president. It's going to say who is going to be the cabinet, who is going to be the cabinet, and it has some more powers, like it has some legislative powers as well. It doesn't answer to the cabinet. It doesn't. It is also the head of the majority party in the parliament. So practically not accountable to the parliament. It has overall control over the judiciary because some of its members, on top of the judiciary there is this commission, decides everything about judiciary. This commission's, part of the members of this judiciary committee is chosen by the president, and the rest are chosen by the parliament, who is also he is also the leader of the majority party in the parliament. So all the judges are actually named by the majority party and by the president, practically. So president also practically not accountable to the judiciary. There are technicalities. I don't want to go very much in detail because we have little time. But practically, they say it is possible to kind of have a parliamentary investigation about the president or send him to High Court. But when you look at the numbers, it's not possible because the elections are going to be done together, the presidential elections and the parliamentary elections, and whoever gets the majority in the parliament gets the presidency as well. That is the system. So in that sense, the numbers they are putting in there, necessary votes for sending the president for investigation or to the court, is not obtainable. So it's practically not very possible. They say, oh, he is going to be answerable to the public, but that is not a check and balance, because the only punishment he will get in the end is not being elected next time. So conclusions we can get: the rule of law is seriously eroded in Turkey, human rights massively violated, corruption and nepotism are mainstream. New constitution brings a new regime which is a departure from what we know, from whatever we know about the Republican history so far. This is a new page, this is a new regime. This new constitution will be officially effective from the next elections. The question now is, when is the next election going to be? There are two, people are talking about an early election, which could be this year, or an election next year, that is the normal date for it. And most analysts, and I also agree with that, the date will be defined basically by the result, the success of the military operation against Syrian Kurds. If they create enough jingoism, kind of much air about it and so on, and something to be presentable as a big victory and so on, they could go an early election. Otherwise, if it drags, the election could be next year. So they will choose the best moment for it. But the most important thing is that the government cannot afford to lose an election in Turkey. That is the most important thing, I think, that we should say, because it is, if they lose an election, they will go to trial. They committed crimes against people, and it is, I mean, it is impossible. They will never lose an election. So that is, it is quite sad to see that the center-left Social Democratic Party, for example, the main opposition, is mostly kind of very much occupied about what it will do in the elections, but it's really useless, because the elections, they will not lose. They will do anything to hang on the power, and the opposition should have more plans to have a democratic expression of whatever they kind of, what else they will do. How are they going to reach people, and how are they going to get the message through? Because they are deprived of almost any tools to reach the public as well. So how is it going to happen? I don't know. That is for discussion, I think. Thank you.
I'm the board member of Emar. I'm going to chair after Kumru. Thank you very much. Very informative and very detailed about Turkey's situation last 15 years. And now Turkey is in war with, in Afrin, and before that in Jarablus. And today we heard they bombed Syrian army convoy before entering Afrin. And it proves a rule in capitalism. If you have very serious socio-economic problems in the country, you got to go out. There are two ways of going out. One is, if you got money, you take it and invest in another country and exploit and give your people to shut up. And second way is, take your army and go to war. That's why people come together and close to each other, easy to move them, easy to move them wherever you like a herd. Now, Turkey's situation is at this stage, in my opinion. And now we got about half an hour, more than half an hour, and everybody's opinions are very important. If you like to say something, please, brief as possible, 3 minutes. But before that, shall we give the word our another friend Zafer, and say something for 5 minutes?
Okay, fine. I'm not prepared for this, but I'm one of the signatories of this peace declaration by the academics, among this 1128 originally, then some additions, but then some withdrawals afterwards, of course. Not an important number, but there are some withdrawals as well. What happened to us is all the people, all the academics who are working in the government-run institutions, universities, have been suspended and then expelled, or expelled straight away, with disciplinary procedures. And after that, when the coup happened in July 2016, KHK, these decrees were issued for many of them, and they were expelled straight away without awaiting the disciplinary procedures. Us in the private universities, or trust universities as they call it, we've been through disciplinary investigations because of being signatories, and of course we are part of the these trials, these lawsuits against us. But these direct decrees were not issued to the private sector academics. So some universities, some private universities, did expel their academics, but the others usually take the route of not renewing the contracts, and the contracts are like 2-year contracts we are on usually. So by the end of the second year, you just lose your job and automatically, and that's my position at the moment exactly. Yeah, that is the situation. But one, if I can make one point about all this, of course, the law is for everybody, and we cannot discriminate. But this golden opportunity that came to the AKP government with the military coup attempt is that when we talk about numbers, like 23,000 lost jobs, we cannot distinguish who is who. That is the problem. I mean, there are these guys who are from Gulen community. Majority of these numbers are from them. Like especially in the law, military, police, and education, half and half. Most of them are involved in the Gulen movement to a certain degree, even in the media as well. But when these purges are done, they were also directed to the Kurdish movement and the left movement and the academics for peace, etc. These decrees were used against them without any involvement whatsoever in the military coup. So it is very confusing, but it's a golden opportunity for the government to put bundle all these together, all the opposition together, and also somehow contaminate our reputation as well with these numbers, because I'm among these numbers, but most of them are Gulen community, okay, supporters.
Thank you.
So that confusion is really annoying.
Can I say something about that? That's true, and you know, we on the left had a big problem with the Gulen movement as well, because they were part of the very undemocratic power as well before they disagreed on things with the government. But there are thousands of people among them, you know, not leftists or, I mean, hundreds of court clerks who were kind of now, you know, their human rights were infringed on, I mean, violated, because they were kind of, it's a kind of thing like they were given the questions at a certain exam to get into that position by the movement. So, but this is not the same thing as attempting a coup. You know, everybody is responsible for the for the things they personally do. That is the law. I mean, you can't just accuse someone because they were kind of close to some organization. They have to do something. They have to do something criminal as well. So it's a bit kind of, you know, we don't know. Nobody knows these people. They don't have names. You know, hundreds of girls, very young girls, for example, were filling the police centers and stuff for ages, you know, and nobody knows who they are, really, and they're not important. They couldn't have played any role in a coup attempt even if they wanted to. You know, that sort of violation, although we don't like the Gulen movement and its impact on the country, we can't just, you know, we have to say that, yeah, in the end, as you say, the law is for everyone. But, of course, you know, one response of the left was, you know, generally in the first days of the purge, you know, we are not Gulenists, you know, that's normal because we are not Gulenists and we were kind of victimized by them as well when they were in power. But here you go, you know, they have their rights too.
If we come back to in your first list of chronological development of elections, referendums, and so on. Now, I would like to point something there. I think it was in 2015 general election, either before it or after that, there was suddenly a small news in the newspapers. If the issue is survival of the state, everything else is just
A detail.
A detail. In this discussion, the head of the Turkish bar, Lawyers Association, said the same thing. If everything will be detailed if the state of survival of the state is the issue, he said. And suddenly, Republican People's Party, which I regard as part of the state itself, not the people's opposition, but part of the state, they said the same thing, survival of the state. And then suddenly we are faced with the Kurdish Hendeks, Kurdish movement sporadically coming into the forefront of the discussion. And suddenly everybody is talking about survival of the state. I think we have to also take into consideration that most of the Turkish people, just faced with this question, said, of course, we have to be on the side of the survival of the state. And that is a very big happening, which has unbelievable bad consequences for the future, because the Kurds were on the other side then. Turks chose the Turkish state. Even some Alawis, who are usually opposition, they are also on the state side. And Kemalist leftists chose the state as well. So Turkish society has been divided into those who are for the survival of the state and those who are not. Unfortunately, we are also faced, on top of all these troubles you have fantastically detailed in numbers as well, with this, how we shall solve this traumatic situation, I actually don't know, but this is a fact. Turks are also part of the crime, in a way.
There is one thing I don't understand. I note what you said about the coup was a godsend for Erdogan, and the fact that you could tell, everybody could tell something was coming. Now this must have been the most incompetent coup in the history of mankind. I mean, there is somebody who's not particularly progressive, Edward Luttward, has written a coup d'etat practical guide. And it's the sort of thing that has been used throughout every CIA coup all around the world. Now, whoever was behind this coup, they just did everything wrong. I mean, I can't believe that the Erdogan side didn't have something to do with it, because there are certain things, I've heard that the Russians told them there were troop movements in Ankara and what have you. Be that as it may, I mean, you don't start a coup in the middle of the rush hour, the rush hour. I mean,
Not on the bridge.
Not on the bridge, yes.
Yeah,
Has anything been said about this?
Yeah, I mean, there was big discussions around this issue, around this question. Who knew what and when? And was it, I mean, on the one extreme, some people claim that, especially the Gulenists, of course, claim that, oh, we had nothing to do with the coup and it's all kind of a government show and illusion. There was no coup attempt, but, you know. And on the other side, it was kind of, oh, we just survived a big thing. I think it's somewhere in between, after reading all the kind of information about the people who kind of, the soldiers who were involved on that night, quite high level people and so on. What is possible, it's all speculation, but what is most possible is that probably, just like everybody else, AKP was also guessing that there was preparation of a coup in the army. I mean, it's impossible that they wouldn't have. And I've heard from my friends who have families who support AKP or members of AKP, saying that the AKP local organizations, local level organizations were preparing for a long time for this possibility. They kind of did trial runs and stuff, you know, who will call who and who will go where, sort of preparations in the case of a coup attempt. This is one thing, they were very prepared. The secondly, of course I thought the same thing as you did. I mean, I saw a proper military coup and 2 half coups myself in my lifetime. But I was, I remember very vividly the military coup of 1980, for example, in Turkey, which is a totally different ballgame, of course. Coups, as we know it in Turkey, are done towards the morning, and they first kind of get in control of the top of the power and the radio and television stations and media, and the rest is easy. They haven't done any of that. My guess, and many others guessed, is that it was an early birth. I mean, they were forced to act. It was an alliance of people in the army, including Gulenists and some others, probably seculars. And it was an alliance. It was planned to be done either that morning, towards the morning, that night, later, towards the morning of the 16th, or a couple of days later, I don't know that, but it indication is that it was going to be towards the morning of the 16th. But the information was leaked, and then they kind of, some of the commanders acted early, some units acted early, and the others did not follow them, because they were afraid that if they didn't act, they were going to be rounded up and so on, so they acted early. I think this is the most reasonable narrative that is closest to what happened. It is a very strange coup attempt, but still, it wasn't obvious. I mean, there were until the president appeared in one of the main television channels, it was in the middle. Despite the fact that it was very clumsy and wrong.
When this iPhone FaceTime.
Yes. Until then, it was in the middle. You could say that because all the television presenters were kind of not knowing exactly what to do, you know. And it was kind of, there was a moment of real danger, I think. I think it wasn't a hoax.
Okay. Anybody else? Let's see if there's somebody else. Okay, so.
Main stakeholder in the Turkish adventure, always military. What we know, military have been suffering their reputation since 2007. Somehow, at 2007 April, Chief of Army negotiated with the Erdogan. We do not know what happened. What was the term of the agreement? That's one thing. Second thing, what dear friend said, if state is the primary, the rest is details. This is the slogan of the army. It's not slogan of the CHP. It's not a slogan of the National Pro-Fascist Party. This is the slogan of the army since 1920s. What happened to army? I'm not buying that army has been dismissed, searched between 2007 and 2016. Army and the ideology of the army was always there in the system. Whether army is controlled by Gulenists, nationalists, CHP people, radicals, the ideology of the army is there. Core is there, still alive. Today is still alive. Enemy is Kurds, crush the Kurds. This happened since 2015, we openly see, but it started, I think, with the Paris attack, 2013. Crush the Kurds. Then crush the Kurds in 2015, in Suruç, in Ankara, in Kobani. Crush the Kurds now, in Afrin. The core is doing its job. Although ill-fated, ill-attempted coup d'etat, although Ergenekon trials, although this, that, but core is still there, in my opinion.
Yeah, but who will crush the Kurds? You or me? They want the power.
They want power. They want power. They are in power. That's what I'm trying to say. Not only AKP guys, not only Erdogan. Because if Erdogan fails,
if the coup was successful, the war with Afrin will still happen.
Still happen.
Yeah.
If Erdogan falls down, head of the army is going to fall down, intelligence head of going to fall down, all the ex-army leaders going to be on trials, not only Erdogan.
But he is managing a game of scaremongering, keeping the people non-dynamic, but always playing the cards carefully. I don't know, but he is managing, keeping power. Anybody else? Yeah.
I want to ask Kumru where she thinks that perhaps at a higher level or more generally Turkish society is going, because in addition to all the things we've discussed and started from dictatorship, there's an undercurrent of change taking place, I think, in society. You can see it, you mentioned religion, there's also the school systems, the change of the education curriculum. These things, curriculums don't change very easily. In Turkey, about twice since the formation of the republic. So, and also what's happening in the military, in the police, the fact that they have different terms of reference for going to war or for fighting against or taking protesters in. I mean, do you see a change, a longer-term change that's not really dependent on the dictator, and even if Erdogan left, you know, disappeared or under a bus, these changes are more threatening in the long term, or not?
Well, this is a million-dollar question. On the one hand, I think the changes happening in the educational system, in the courts, justice, judicial system, in the constitution, constitution, in the traditions of democratic traditions, suppression of the democratic, any small democratic traditions we have. The changes, whether they are kind of changes in the culture or changes changes in the legislation, constitution, they are going to be very difficult to go back, even if Erdogan falls today. I mean, we cannot go back to 2002 or 2007. Things have changed, and they kind of changed. They made systemic changes. Cultural, that creates a totally different culture and so on. For example, at the end of 2013, I think it was, when the Gulenists leaked all the corruption files. You know, after all that dirt and mud and shit, excuse my language, came out, and everybody know about it, and they are still in the government. That is like corruption within the culture, within the, you know, political values. The values. I mean, so it is normalized. So these things could happen. People can do these things, and they can still be in power. So people, the new generations, will grow up with this knowledge. This is really horrible. This is more dangerous than the religious schools. They changed the curriculum and etc. And also, I mean, everything is changing. Like the army's rituals are changing into religious rituals. The rituals of everything are changing. So the thing is that it's kind of, my problem here is, I don't think that AKP is a ideological party. I think they are very pragmatic. They're doing this not for the sake of religion. They're doing this because they can control people more easily through this. People who can be kind of controlled by religion and through religion are easier to deal with. Religious values and culture is not necessarily, it doesn't need necessarily democratic values to go with its existence. So I think it's very dangerous. But saying all that, I don't want to be overly optimistic or anything, and I am not. I'm quite depressed with looking at the situation. But still, this is not only Turkey. This is a global phenomenon, and this is happening quite a number of countries in the world, including US, and the authoritarianism and kind of to be simplistic about it, capitalism cannot afford liberal policies anymore in politics and society, and it's kind of holding tight onto kind of its rule. It's happening all over the European countries now, many of the newcomers to EU and so on. So it's quite similar processes going on actually. The same methods are being used as well. So it's a global problem, and I believe that it's going to have a global response by the people, as well as Turkey, within Turkey. I think there is the answers to that is the methods, the ways of thinking and resistance people are developing as well. They are looking for new ways of challenging this new problem. Just like we can talk about, we are at a historical turning point, I think, in global history in that sense. We saw Occupy movement, we have all the kind of Tahrir and this and that, and Gezi, and, you know, before that we had the social forums, and, you know, there is a people's opposition also kind of creating its own waves and looking for its own methods as well. It's not as strong at the moment, but I think it exists. For example,
one of the main opposition of this against this madness is common sense of the ordinary people. Anytime.
It's true, but it's not organized.
That's not organized. That's the problem. Yeah.
Yeah. But one thing also, I mean, even in journalism, my profession is becoming more important. Remember this, for example, the Paradise Papers, Malta Papers, what was the other one? Panama Papers. All these corruption and wrongdoings and everything within the system is kind of being leaked by pools of journalists in the world. Journalists are becoming something they were not. You know, everything is changing. Everything is changing, as you know, and becoming different now. It's a change period we are in, and I think I want to think like nobody expected, for example, Gezi to happen. All of us were quite surprised when it kind of grew like a wave and took all of us in. I believe that, of course, spontaneous kind of movements like that could go up and down like, you know, like that. But I think there is a tradition, there is a knowledge that remain in people's minds, and I think there is a line of people's response to this new period in capitalist political system.
Okay, a couple of more contributions.
You mentioned everything about Turkey, but of course, it's other than the Kurds, you know, Afrin or wherever, it's really affecting the whole region.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen the Greek attitudes towards Erdogan right now, and the provocations of the Kemalist military have been there for all this time, but now the Greeks are roaring quite a lot, daring to do nothing but complain about Macedonians instead.
Yeah.
And even yesterday, it became even more apparent where an Italian frigate apparently changed course, was going to intercept Turkish boats outside Cyprus, and it was instructed to just leave altogether. So, you know, Erdogan is obviously becoming, you know, his influence is well outside the borders, and, you know, never mind Greece. I mean, if Italy doesn't bother sort of protect their own interests in the Mediterranean, God knows what next.
It's gambling.
It's a bully's world.
Anybody else? New people? You've got another 2-3 minutes. Okay, Mr.
What we are forgetting about Turkey, 1980 coup. We haven't dealt with the 1980 coup as a Turkish citizen. We didn't kick off anything. We didn't dealt with the military who involved in. We didn't dealt with the Özal. All the product of the coup. Of course, we are facing this. We accepted coup values for years and years. Coup changed the education system. Coup changed the university freedom.
Even before the coup, we didn't have a very democratic tradition.
Exactly. But what happened there was quite crucial. We accepted.
Yes, Mike.
I would like to have your comment on this as well. Now, I lived through the 12th of March 1971. There was a resistance against it. Civilian and leftists, weaponed or not weaponed, they resisted the coup in a way. in 1980, before 1980, there were lots of class struggle and lots of fights. And even after 1980, there was very strong resistance against the military junta. Now, for the first time, nobody resists.
I don't think so.
Well, I'm just talking apparently.
Yeah.
I have attended the recent spot conference. There were lots of complaints. Even those trade unionists, they were just talking about that this is nothing new, they said. It started in 1980s, they said. There is a qualitative difference with this last happening, and it goes towards not totalitarianism, but it goes also to despotism in many ways. It will be a despot creating his own laws, and everybody is dependent on him, and there is a new generation of bureaucrats who will be working, taking everything granted for him. So they will be accepting despotism. That's a new standard in Turkish society. But apparently, no leftist, except I'm just keeping the Kurdish opposition aside, no leftist resistance against this structurally very important, very harsh environment in Turkey. In 1930s, in Germany, when Hitler came in the same fashions, same way, just crushing, winning the elections and organizing the streets, there was a huge, powerful communist party. There is nothing now in Turkey. How do you interpret this situation?
I think we are in a very different era now. I mean, if you look at anything closer, there are problems like before Hitler came to power, communists and social democrats really were on each other's throats, and that was a very important thing that kind of helped Hitler quite a lot. But you're right, in 1972, in 80, things were different. In 72, it was the if you think of the global context as well, 72 was a response to the movements that were kind of a wave after the 68 movement in Europe and so on, in Turkey, the armed struggle and so revolutionary movements for the first time were quite a different kind of global context. Before the coup of 80, the left wing and especially the working class was very strong. I mean, of course, comparison,
Organized.
yeah, organized. There were strong unions and everything, and they kind of managed to stop certain very critical bills, like they kind of stopped the state degemechi, stopped the military courts and stuff. And that was why that coup happened anyway, to crush the working class organization. I mean, I think that was the main reason Turkey to be part of the globalization. Those unions had to be crushed, definitely, and left as well. But I think we are past that age now. The world is in a different age, and if a people's movement will kind of come about, it will not be about the left as such as we know it. It's going to be, we are going to be talking about something like kind of a big alliance of people. We have to, because I believe very much in what the Occupy movement kind of discussed. Like they said, one very important thing. Now we are at a stage when of capitalism where the rulers are only 1% of the society, and we are 99%. We are the 99%. So we have to think about it as a people's movement rather than a big alliance, rather than the forms of organization we know so far are not enough or sufficient to cover all that. We have to find out new ways of allying and organizing on every level, I think. It's not going to be the old style, old school communist parties and this and that and unions. It's going to be, it has to be more encompassing than that.
I find it really
Okay.
optimistic, but
Last speaker,
It has to be.
Imran, 3 minutes.
Okay. I will not respond to what you said. Just want to point out one issue which is quite important. A comrade of us, actually Meriç, some of you know, or Mary, said that if you take a plate to the remote village of an Africa and take it there, a capitalism will start there because of this small plate. Whatever we do, also there is the system uses its own benefit. For example, STKs, which is, I don't know what is it called in English. NGOs. When they appeared, it's good because they surround the issues and exactly what you said, that it can create a big alliance because they try to cater that one and you cater the other one, etc. So we can link and everything in that fashion, I believe, possible. But then what happened to the state accounts in America? They use it for themselves. What Paul said, what they write in their pieces of papers, what books are published, or kill the Sedekas, and they become part of them. And the people who said some slogan or something, it was useful for Iraq occupation, Afghanistan occupation, they are giving the best places in the important establishment. So that also kills us. The money kills us. And we are also changed, instead of becoming quality, become quantity. That is very important.
It's, I'll show you one very nice resistance. People are, can I add something to what you say? I was thinking about this. I was a member of a left-wing organization when the coup of 1980 happened, and suffered as a result. At that time, what we lived was kind of a total surrender of the society, basically. Everybody, the army or the state, the establishment, very skillfully prepared a process where everybody was ready to say, hey, you know, at last the army came and the blood is stopped. You know, they prepared this and we fall for it. And when it happened, we were just left alone. We were just hunted one by one and crushed. People, in general, 99% or maybe 90% approved of the 1980 Constitution, 82 Constitution, which was a very authoritarian. 92%. 8% only didn't say yes. So it was that. Today, the situation is different, I think. There is no organized resistance as such as we know it, but people are not, they are resisting, they're not accepting individuals like this person, like others, many other people, women's movement, lots of people, journalists, academics, they are sitting in their corners, although scared and everything, but they're still not surrendering. I think that because they think it's not right. It happened, for example, when last year the referendum happened, the voting was done under incredible oppression and rigged and everything, and still the no camp actually, I think, has won it. More than 50% people, I believe, voted no to the constitution. It never happened in the 1980s. This is a resistance. I think we should take it from there. People are, because they are seeing that this is the end of their way of life. Things are changing. They want to send their children away. They are seeing it coming. The 80 coup was quite limited in its kind of targeting. But this one is not. They're targeting everybody now, and people are not accepting it. I think this is something to give us hope.
Silent opposition. Okay, anybody else? We've got another 4 minutes. Somebody else.
One small thing I want to add up what you said, Kumru, at the last. There is books, beautiful books coming out, all translated from old time, new time, whatever. But they are disappearing very quickly. So it means that the people are reading. That is also a hope.
Anybody else? We can't talk in Turkish, we can translate. If not, I think, in my opinion, Turkey is entering another era, not of Middle East. I think we need to think about it and
Mad Max of Middle East.
yeah.
And the world.
And the world, yeah.
Trump var ya.
Yeah,
Mad Max, Big One.
yeah. Trump, Putin, and others. Okay, thank you very much for attending.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for